Oi! Oi! Oh, it's much too bright up here. Stay there, I'll be down in a second. So, do you want flip-flops, t-shirts, hoodies? Well, you can go to sirmeeple.com and you can buy everything in the world, because everything in the world is there for you. sirmeeple.com.
Art has a terrifically bad rap. This is because of the Enclosure Act of 1773. This is because there are people who wish to throw up fences around things. A fence is an arbitrary way to separate. Inside, outside, in vogue, dated, clever, stupid. The list is endless. These are the ways we demarcate ownership, because that's what we crave, ownership. We've had it driven into us, the desire for property, and property is not just the ground under our feet and the piles of mullock in our houses. If you're particularly avaricious, ideas can be property too. If you enforce the Enclosure Act of 1773, if you take what is common and scar it with fences, fences made out of argot or purity tests, fences made out of identity requirements and loyalty oaths. Our desire for property is so strong that we will arbitrarily close out others from ideas that we all should share. This is why art has such a bad rap. When people think of art, they think of derisive snorts, they think of disingenuous enthusiasm, they think of snobbery, and they shouldn't. The wonderful thing about the field of ideas is that it's infinite, and we can leave those desirous of pushing us out of their own little corner of the field to it. Look around you, see that huge expanse stretching off into the distance? That's for us, for all of us, and the Enclosure Act can never work because you can't enclose infinity. This is why art, despite its terrible reputation, it's for everyone. Usually, someone would flash up a definition from a dictionary here. I won't. This is because the dictionary, as useful as it is out of date the second it's printed. Language is dynamic and fluid. The dictionary is always running to keep up with the language. And once it gets there, hands on its knees, pouring sweat, the language has already bounded on. This is why we shouldn't believe that words have some intrinsic value, some intrinsic meaning, because the facts simply don't bear it out. Just as the word silly can start off meaning blissful, transform into meaning pious, and then pitiable, and end up at giddy, no word can only have one meaning. Sanction, for instance, means its opposite in certain situations, and love has a myriad of meanings depending on who or what it's directed at. If we try and impose some sort of magic virtue onto the meanings of words, they will slip out of our hands and be swept away by the river of development. All of this is a roundabout way of saying that I have very little interest in what the dictionary defines as art. That in itself is using the Enclosure Act of 1773. It could be a useful starting point, but I want to pull the camera back. Partly because by doing this we can make art as all-encompassing and democratic as possible, and secondly, because it gives me almost infinite justification for any stupid bloody argument I just came up with. Before we go on, I just want to remind you that if you have a vehement disagreement with anything I say here, there's a comment section below, and I would love you to use it. My definition of art goes something like this. Art is the mechanism we use to tell us about ourselves. Art is not mere reproduction, it's not merely holding up a mirror to ourselves, but an examination of who we are. The good we do, the evil we can't, the sheer unfairness of chance. Art is how we make sense of all those intangibles that touch us. Shakespeare can tell us about the destructiveness of overweening ambition in Macbeth, and Mondrian can unlock our love of pattern and colour. Pantera is anger, and Halcyon by Orbital is unalloyed joy. The Exorcist is mortality and fear, and Frankenstein's monster singing Putting on the Ritz is hilarity and parental pride, and all of it is deeply, deeply human. All of it is art. The constant discussion as to whether games are art is an encouraging one. Not because it's particularly interesting, but it's a waypoint. Because when you pass that particular bump in the landscape, you've passed the point of no return. Once that discussion starts to swirl in the atmosphere, you know that you're dealing with a form of art. I am sure that there are loads of people who are fatigued by the discussion surrounding games recently, worn out by the wrangling over the content of games, the box art of games, the historical context of games, and I feel sympathy for that. It can feel that these things you love are being used as projectiles in a pitched battle in a culture war. But the rigorousness of these debates, in no way ameliorated by the reductiveness of social media, is encouraging. Not, I hasten to add, the ad hominem attacks, the hitching of morality to an argument on aesthetics, not the conflation of disagreement with moral turpitude, or the ease with which people simply mute those who don't share their views. All of that silicon ordinance is against the Human Rights Act. But the arguments themselves, the discussion itself, is encouraging. Why? It's because it's proof that these things we lay on tables and manipulate touch us. They tell us something, and that something is profound enough that we feel we have to reach out to others and discuss it. It is proof that these things we love transcend mere distraction and smack us where we're most human. It is proof that they are vital and relevant and impactful. No longer are these games the McDonald's or Burger King of recreation. They can stand shoulder to shoulder with books and paintings and music because they fulfill the same function as them. They promote thought and feeling. They make us look inward and outward. They tell us something about ourselves, and because of this, they're art. I interviewed Inka Brandt on my show and asked her whether or not she thought games were art. This was her answer.
Ich würde sagen, nein, für mich ist es kein...
I would say no, they're not art. It has more to do with fun and getting together. Obviously, there are games that are different, that are on the border, but in essence, it's not art, more social culture.
Aber grundsätzlich würde ich die eher nicht bei Kunst einordnen, sondern mehr bei einem Gesellschaftskulturgut.
This, I think, and please excuse the amateur psychology, is more of a comment on where she sees herself as a designer than of the form itself. There is an inherent modesty in her statement. The idea that if you're to call games art, then the people who create them are artists. I am sure that if you were to ask her if she thought of herself as an artist, she would resist such an appellation, and I agree with her. I have done countless theatre productions in my life, and because I have been cursed with the personality that I have had countless arguments in the rehearsal room. Most of those arguments have stemmed from me perceiving a preciousness from the other actor as to their performance, a refusal in their part to respect the hierarchy of the theatre and to do what the director has asked of them. This is because they feel that there is a sanctity to the work they're doing. Most of the rows I've had with other actors are because those other actors thought they were artists. It comes down to the distinction between the artist and the craftsperson. It's a question of whether you are serving yourself or others with what you create. Being an artist is a solipsistic pursuit. It is about serving yourself and your needs. And if others latch onto it and see the value in it, that is a wonderful byproduct, but it's utterly inconsequential to the artist's relationship to their work. The craftsperson works to make others appreciate what they do. There are, of course, boundaries of accommodation that the craftsperson won't cross, but their goal is outwards and not inwards. It is work that is for others and for others' appreciation, and that is the goal. The goal of the game designer is to make work that is enjoyed and appreciated by others. Their appreciation of their own work is only necessary in as far as it encourages them to carry on and to invest in it. I truly believe that if you are involved in any performative pursuit, game design being one of them, that you should aspire to craft and not art. The decision as to whether the work you produce is art is for others to decide. The craftsperson gives their work to others, and if that work promotes sensation, if that work gives the consumer an insight into themselves or others around them, if it tells them something about the world, then they can call it art. And if enough of us agree, then we can call it art. This is why it is not just the creator of the game that is vital to gaming, but it is the player too. Because the creation of games is a craft that we are needed to complete the circle of creation. We are as important to games as the people who put the mechanisms together. We make games art. I think it would be a dereliction of duty if I didn't talk about some actual games. Games create art by combining mechanisms and illustration and sometimes, though mostly poorly, words. Here are some games that I think do it beautifully. Not always 100% successfully, but beautifully. This is so far out of the realm of normal board game fare that it should be applauded for its sheer audacity. Players take on the roles of caregivers to a man who has suffered a huge heart attack and try to tease out the story of his life from his muddled brain before he dies. This is a game that seeks to encompass the whole breadth of human life within the narrow confines of a game box. There is loss, love, filial separation, ecstasy, grief, and ultimately death. As the players play, more of the patient's life is revealed, and the players realise that this unextraordinary man has led an extraordinary life. They realise that within the span of a single human life on this planet, there is time for wonderful and rending things to happen. The players realise that even though the overwhelming majority won't even trouble the footnotes of a history book, we live incredible lives, and our passage through them touches others in profound ways. There are two images in the game that stay with me. It's these. One is full of optimism, joy, and potential. This is mirrored by the loss here. The tenderness and solitude. It shows us that although our joys are shared, our grief is our own. It is one of the most important possessions we will ever receive, and it's the one we want the least. It could be said that holding on can descend into repetition, but the game is worth it for the discovery of this beautiful mirroring and juxtaposition. It is deft storytelling that is infinitely human. Cynical avarice is at the heart of this game. This is a game that tells us that everything has a price, and the more profound, the more affirming of what we are of a species it is, the higher the price. This is not a game that simply simulates the art market, but asks us what art is for. We take on the roles of the bottom feeders of the art world. We take the work of the soul and perform alchemy. We turn it into gold. Modern art posits a world in which nothing is sacred, that it is of no importance what happens to the art after we sell it, as long as it gets sold. The artists themselves are afterthoughts, just names on cards. sides. We are at the centre of art. We decide what is valuable and what isn't. It is also telling that in every edition of the game, the artists are different, because the art itself, the way the light plays off the leaves, is utterly inconsequential to the real goal, and that is cash. Modern art is the cruelest type of satire because it paints a world in which everything has a price, and it is only that price that gives anything any worth. The fact that the accumulation of wealth is so much fun is also a warning that none of us are strong enough to resist the urge for more, and the more we amass, the more the pigments on the canvas fade until they're all the same shade of green. Nothing is sacred except cash. This is what modern art tells us. There is no game that tells us more about love and friendship than the Grizzled. When everything is disintegrated into chaos, when the thin veneer that we've laid over our societies to convince ourselves we aren't animals have been torn away, we only have each other. There is no etiquette, there is no money, there is no God. There is no value in anything but the connections we have with each other. Love and support are the currencies when we could all die in an instant. Evolution has sculpted us to be social and to find solace in one another. The Grizzled tells us that when everything is gone, when the comforts of society have been purloined, that we are all the same. And it's only through one another that we find ourselves, that we can have hope. The Grizzled tells us that the only truth that matters, a truth that Amazon and Netflix are trying to make us forget, is that we only live because of others, and the only thing that makes us truly human are others. There is a reason that solitary confinement is a punishment. What if you just think that games are games and all of this arty-farty nonsense is encroaching on that thing you love? Well, that's totally cool. That's the thing about art, you see. You get from it exactly what you want to. You might not have any desire for tenuous arguments about the nature of being, and you shouldn't be forced to have them. Remember the Enclosure Act of 1773? The field of ideas is massive, and there's room on it for you. Whatever you get from games, the reason that you keep coming back to the table, that feeling of flow, the rush of a well-placed combo, eking out those final few points. This is what games are, and this is how games express themselves as art. Games are interactive works whose purpose is to bring out of us all of those things that make us human. They give us problems to solve, they befuddle us when strategies are elusive, they make us laugh and snarl and take sharp intakes of breath. Good or bad, games drag emotions out of us, connect us with the very things that make us human. They speak to us about our foibles and virtues. They tell us directly what we're good at and what we're awful at. And even if you shy away from giving them such a grand title, it makes them art. We've all had those moments. The game has just finished and no one moves. There is no flurry to put the pieces away, to put our coats on and leave. We sit there, silent, maybe for 30 seconds, maybe for longer, and we drink in the game we've just finished. We sit in a reverie of decisions well made, of paths not taken. We sit in wonderment at the collection of abstract ideas that brought us to this table, that have made us sit down and have produced such a flow of wonderful chemicals in our brain that we just sit silent, drinking in the game we've just played. I've spoken a lot about what art is in this piece. I've not really spoken about the purpose of art. It might tell us about ourselves, but why? Why do we need to know about ourselves? To interrogate who and what we are? Is it narcissism? I don't think so. It is that this knowledge brings us together, And art facilitates the acquisition of this knowledge. Art gives us a shared reference and a shared vocabulary, and more importantly, a shared focus. From the ochre handprints in Lascaux and Sulawesi to the chink of the pieces in mandala stones, these works of art give us something to experience. They bring us together to chat and debate, to reminisce and plan. Games are a form of interactive art that compel us to sit around a table, manipulate the pieces and tell our own stories. This is why art exists. It exists to make us more compassionate, to make us more reasoned, to tell us about ourselves so we can be ourselves. To create art, to appreciate art is instinctive and intrinsic to who we are, and so, by playing games, we become more human. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe, and if you've really enjoyed this video, you can help support the making of even more patreon.com/5G4D.